Thank you for that intro. When I told my wife, as you just heard, my wife Colleen is a 1992 grad of BC, and I told her that I was speaking at this tonight. She looked at me and said, "What in the world do they have you speaking at that time?" And one of the running jokes in my family is that my wife, she was accepted to Boston College in 1988, and I was accepted about 35 years later, 2024. So, no, this is it's really cool to be here tonight. When I think about as I was walking over here, I thought about, well, first of all, who? Because this is a faith-based kind of conversation. So, how many people are here in the crowd that are basically, let's say, from New England, from the Boston area? Raise your hand. Okay, so how many people are from California or Florida? Okay, so to all you people, have faith that it will get warmer here. I promise you it will. It will get warmer here. So look, I don't really have a prepared speech. Somebody in the hallway said, "Hey, good luck with your speech." I don't really have a prepared speech. What I just wanted to do was, just kind of tell you a little bit about my story. I really don't enjoy talking about myself that much, but I will, just give you some things along the lines of my journey, and how it ended up here at Boston College. So I grew up 30 minutes north of here. I grew up. It's a lot of times in my bio, it says that I grew up in Dorchester. I spent probably 5 minutes in Dorchester. I was born in at St. Margaret's Hospital in Dorchester. At that time, my mom and dad, they lived in Scituate. So I was born in Dorchester, and my dad, he worked for ITT, which was a semiconductor business, long time ago. And my mom was a librarian, and I have two older brothers. And so my oldest brother is 10 years older than me, and my middle brother is 6 years older than me. And, basically, it was an Irish Catholic family. We went to church every Sunday. I would tell you that my mom pretty much went to daily mass, probably to pray for her sons, to make sure that her sons were staying out of trouble. But we went to, mass every Sunday. I wouldn't say it was a strict Catholic house, but it was very faith-based, because my parents, they raised us to, have a strong belief in family, how important it was to be, loyal to your family, to understand the history of your family. They raised us to understand the value of education, and they raised us to understand the value of hard work and what that meant in your life, and to just keep putting one foot in front of the other and working hard, because you're going to deal with adversity in life. And if you can understand the value of, your faith, the value of, your education and your family and all those things, that, look, there's going to be hard times down the road, but, these are things that were stressed by my family. And so eventually we moved from Scituate, and I basically grew up, because I was little in Scituate. I was probably 4 or 5 when we moved from Scituate. So I basically grew up in Andover. Anybody here from Andover? Nope. Okay. Oh, awesome. So I grew up in Andover, and that's where I spent most of my young life. And one of the things that happened to me along the way was, my mom and dad, as I was in public school in Andover, things were going okay, but it was kind of going in a different direction. I was playing sports. I played football, basketball, and baseball. I was on the team. I wasn't a great player, but loved all the teams, loved being on the team. And so eventually what happened was they found 2 schools. My parents found 2 schools, and one was Central Catholic. Anybody here go to Central Catholic in Lawrence, Massachusetts? No? Okay, anybody here go to St. John's Prep in Danvers, Massachusetts? So I know we have one. I know there was another guy I met from St. John's Prep. So my parents, when I was in the 8th grade, they had me apply to these 2 schools. And I got into both schools by the skin of my teeth. And they said, you know what? We're going to go to St. John's Prep. Now, St. John's Prep was about a half an hour from where I lived in Andover. But it was probably, for the first time in my young life, it was where I started to basically understand, what my parents were trying to do and what they were trying to teach me. Because that school, much like this school, was a school where, everybody was basically like-minded. We all came from, similar family backgrounds. We all, came from the North Shore of Boston or north of Boston. It was a very sports-oriented school. So, being on teams was very important. It was a great academic school, but it was very much a school where outside of your teachers and your coaches, you had people there that you could go and seek out if you needed help, if you needed advice. And one of the first people that I came into contact with at St. John's Prep was a guy named Father Tony Penna. How many people know him? Thank you. Now more hands go up. So Father Tony Penna was our high school football chaplain at St. John's Prep. In fact, when I graduated from St. John's Prep in 1988, that's when he came to Boston College right after that. So he's been at Boston College for 30 plus years. He was the football chaplain here at BC. He's now the hockey team chaplain. Just an awesome person. And I can remember certain things happened during my high school career. I had 5 best friends that were still friends together to this day. We're still best friends. And certain things happened. We had a guy who grew up in Hamilton, Massachusetts, and he had a close friend from Hamilton who unfortunately died in a drunk driving accident. And Father Tony said his funeral. And I will never, in as long as I live, I'll never forget that. I think I was probably 17, 18 years old. And I remember going to that funeral. And I remember listening to Father Tony and how Father Tony described this young guy's life and how important it was to understand that, the faith that you have when tragedy hits, when things happen in your life that are just absolutely terrible, that your faith in God is essential. And Father Tony began to teach us that. And so that was, like I said, the first person in my life that really, outside of my mom and dad, that really taught me about how important it was to have faith in God. When I graduated from St. John's Prep, I went to Brown University. The only reason I got into Brown University is basically my whole family went there. So I was a legacy at Brown. I played football at Brown. My parents had gone there. My 2 older brothers had gone there. And so it was kind of a family school for us at Brown. And I knew from a young age at Brown that I was going to get into coaching. And people always say to me, why the hell did you go to Brown to get into coaching? Well, again, it was a family school, and it was a place where I felt like this was a place that I was going to be able to excel at. It was a place that I knew I could play football there. It was a place where I knew I could, become a part of a good network of people. And so, at the end of the day, no matter what I wanted to do after college, this was a great college for me. So I went to Brown, and when I graduated from Brown, I got right into coaching. And when I got into coaching, the first thing I did was I coached at Brown for 2 years. And then I went to Georgia Tech. And I was at Georgia Tech for 9 seasons. And when I was at Georgia Tech, I met my wife. So the way that I met my wife was a guy that coached with me at Georgia Tech is now the offensive line coach of the New England Patriots, a guy named Doug Marrone. I don't know if anybody knows Doug Marrone, but he's the line coach of the New England Patriots. So anyways, we coached together at Georgia Tech. And his girlfriend at the time, who is now his wife, Helen, at the time her name was Helen Donnelly, her maiden name was Helen Donnelly. My wife and Helen, so my wife Colleen and Helen, were college roommates at Boston College. And so my wife had introduced them to each other back in the day, and then they introduced us. And so that's how I met my wife. And so we were married in 1998. And right after, I'd say 2 years after we were married, my wife, she was pregnant. And she was pregnant with our first son. And this is another kind of faith-based part of the story that's very personal to me. And sometimes I hesitate to tell this, but I think it's kind of public knowledge, so I don't mind telling it. So basically, I think it was around 2001. I should know this exact year. I know the date, but not the year. But it was 2001, and my oldest son, Jack, was born. And when Jack was born, it was probably a short time after he was born. At 6 months of age, 7 months, 8 months of age, you could tell that he wasn't developing at a normal rate. And, it was really our moms, my mom, Colleen's mom, that, they were parents. They could tell. They're like, there's something going on here. It's not great. So at that time, I had just left Georgia Tech, and I had gone to the University of Maryland to coach. I was a running back coach for the Terps. And we're at Maryland. Something's going on with my son, Jack. We take him to Johns Hopkins Children's Hospital, the wing of their hospital, the Children's Center. And basically they do a bunch of tests on him, and it comes to find out that he has something called lissencephaly. Lissencephaly, when you hear that as a parent, that's probably one of the worst things you can hear as a parent, because that means smooth brain. So a Latin term, smooth brain. He was just handed, he was dealt bad hand in life. And so my wife and I'll never forget this. And I told this story at Latare Sunday. That was a great answer, by the way, on Latare Sunday. Whoever answered that was great. I told this story last weekend at Latare Sunday because at that point in time, our faith in God was huge, because you really don't have many choices. You're excited. You just had your first child, and all of a sudden they're telling you that your first child won't live past the age of 2. Well, my wife and I, especially my wife, again, a BC grad, she said, this is what we're going to do. We're going to provide Jack, his name's Jack, with the best life we can possibly provide him. We're going to, shower him with love. We're going to give him every opportunity we can. We're going to be with him every minute of the day. And we're going to make sure, because of our faith in God, our faith in each other, that this kid has a great life. And we had a doctor. That told us this kid won't live past 2. And I don't know where that doctor is now, but Jack he'll be 24 in August. And Jack requires 24/7 care, mostly provided by my wife and some nurses that help us out. I think that's just an incredible story relative mostly to my wife, of faith in God, faith that understanding that your life will take you on different twists and different turns. Things in your life, most of the time will be good. But I tell the guys at Boston College all the time, I tell the football team all the time, it's really how you deal with adversity. Because life is about adversity. Life is not always a bed of roses. It's very good most of the time. And everybody in here has their own unique story that I'm sure they can tell me right now, that they've had to deal with things in your young lives where you've had to deal with adversity. I think that's where having a faith in God is so important. So if you rewind now and you go back to my career, I was at Maryland. I went to Duke. And I'll tell you a story about this because we felt like Duke at the time gave us they had a really good children's hospital there that had a specialty in what my son had. And so we felt like that was a good move. A buddy of mine was the head coach. We stayed 2 years. And what happened was, over the course of my years at Georgia Tech in Maryland, I had met Bill Belichick at clinics or different things that I had done, or I had met guys that knew him, or my neighbor in Atlanta when I coached at Georgia Tech was a guy named Jason Light, who was a scout for the New England Patriots at the time, so kind of connection there. So anyways, Coach Belichick had a quality control job at the New England Patriots. In fact, one of my great friends is here, the Boston College Chief of Staff, Bears Nigerian, here at the back. He's with us tonight. Awesome guy. And so I went there in 2007. We went there to the Patriots, and that was a good thing for us because we were back home and we were around family, and family could help us with Jack. And my wife is actually from Plattsburgh, New York, so her parents could help because they were closer. We were closer to my brothers. We were closer to my parents. And that was kind of an interesting thing. And I think one of the things that helped there too was we were closer to where, we had gone to church, or we had, you know, developed our faith in God. Boston College, because Colleen had gone here, so we moved back. We're coaching for the Patriots. We go to church at St. Joe's or St. Ignatius, or we lived in Medfield, going to church in Catholic church near Medfield. So I think that move helped us. So in my time there at the Patriots, things went pretty decently. And in 2012, I was hired as the head coach at Penn State. And I don't know if you guys are familiar with what was going on at Penn State at the time, but I followed Joe Paterno. There was a horrible thing that had happened at Penn State, and I can get into all that, but I followed Joe Paterno, and we had a situation when I got there where they had NCAA violations and all these things, and they basically shut down the program. They said we couldn't go to a bowl. They said we couldn't compete for a Big Ten championship. And again, that tested my wife and I, that tested our faith. And we felt like one of the things that we felt when we went there was we had committed to going there for 2 years. We said, we're going to do this for 2 years. We're going to try to, bridge the gap to where Penn State can eventually get back to. But our faith helped us a lot there because it was tested. And if you kind of look back on that time, you guys are young, you probably don't remember it, but we had to cut down to 65 scholarships. It was just a brutal situation. But we actually won games. We won games because we had great people in the program. We had great kids on the team. We had good coaches. We had faith in each other. And that was another example of dealing with adversity and dealing with adversity through our own faith. And so I think that's just another example of, a faith-based story. From Penn State, I went to the Houston Texans. And I'll fast forward from there. I spent 7 years as the head coach of the Houston Texans, and then we got fired. And when we got fired, I was out of work for about 3 months, and Nick Saban hired me at Alabama to be the offensive coordinator at Alabama. So I went to Alabama, went there for 2 years, and then, we were at the end of our time at Alabama, and I went back to the Patriots in 2023. That's where our faith was really tested, because I was back at the Patriots in 2023. That was not the same as the Patriots that I had been before. So our faith was tested there. And then fast forward, went to Ohio State for a month. And at the end of 23, was at Ohio State for 1 month. And this job came open. And Colleen and I talked a lot about this, and we know a lot of people that played here. We knew a lot of the history of the program and things like that. And we knew that this was a great fit for us, that this was a place where we could be around like-minded people that understood the value of an education combined with football, combined with a man and a woman for others, what the theme of BC is, doing a lot in the community, giving back to the community, getting back in touch with people like Father Tony Penna, having the opportunity to meet somebody like Father Jack Butler, who's been a great resource and mentor for me in the year and change that I've been here. And so this was a move that we knew was good for our family. It was good for us, and it was just something that we were, this is a great fit, and we jumped at the chance to be here, and we are thrilled to be here. I'm thrilled to be here tonight. Like I said, I don't have a speech. I just wanted to kind of give you some different examples of how important faith is. I do want to tell you this. I think it's very important to understand as you go through, just kind of I'm not giving you advice, just kind of telling you that, as you go through life, there's different things, like I kind of said before, that you're going to have to deal with, right? It might be some good news, right? You're riding high, feel good about where you are, whether it's in your job or in school or whatever it might be. And then there's going to be things where you kind of get knocked down a little bit. How do you deal with that, right? And I think in the end, it's a consistent approach to life is what I talk to our guys about all the time. Having a consistent approach to life allows you to deal with these things in a manner where, I'm going to come out on the right end of things. And I think having faith in God is a big part of that. One of the greatest things that I do right now since I arrived here on campus, and I see some people in here because I see at church, is I go to Mass up on upper campus. I go to the 11 a.m. Mass at St. Joe's Chapel. And it's a rotation, as some people in here know, of Father Jack, Father Tony, and Father Greg. And for me, that's a time in the week where it kind of recenters me. You know, like, just speaking personally, like, you know, the week can be hectic. There's a lot going on. There's different things, different responsibilities that you have. It's spring practice right now. Then it's going to be going out in May and we're recruiting and we're fundraising. And then it's going to be summer workouts. Then it's going to be training camp. Before you know it, we're playing the Florida Rams. And so, like, when I go to St. Joe's on upper campus and one of those guys says Mass and gives his homily, it just starts my week on the right track. And it's just another example of having faith in God that I think is a huge part of Boston College. And I think it's one of the best parts about Boston College. I do want to say this. I really do appreciate, this is a football thing though, when you guys go to the games. You know, when we beat Michigan State, when we beat Syracuse, we beat North Carolina, we beat Pitt at home. You know, a lot of that was because of you guys, the students in that corner section over there. That's a distinct home field advantage for us. So I really appreciate that. That's a big deal. What I've asked, because somebody told me, I said, sometimes they leave. Why do the students leave? Look, nobody likes a good tailgate better than me, so I get it. But why do they leave before the end of the game or whatever? Say it's a tight game. Why do they leave? Well, it's because they played bright side. They played bright side, you know, in the third quarter. Well, next year we might kick bright side back a little bit. So hopefully you guys will stay.